The sun cast a harsh, unyielding light through the courtroom's narrow windows, illuminating the polished wood and austere decor that marked the room as a place of judgment. People filled the benches, their voices hushed, their eyes fixed on the figure who sat in a chair, hands clasped in his lap, waiting for the judge's decision. Lewis Harper, a decorated war veteran, had spent his life fighting for others. Today, he was here to fight for himself. In his late 50s, Harper's face bore the marks of hardship. His skin was dark and weathered, etched with lines that told stories of battles fought both overseas and back home. His back was straight, and despite the exhaustion in his eyes, his gaze was steady, unwavering. He was a man who had endured, who had faced down fear and death more times than he could count. But today, standing before Judge Thomas Lowry, Harper was confronting a different kind of battle, the unforgiving machinery of the justice system. Judge Lowry's reputation preceded him. Known for his strict adherence to the letter of the law, he was a man who rarely, if ever, showed mercy. Some praised him for his dedication. Others whispered that he had long ago traded compassion for power, wielding his authority like a weapon. His rulings were absolute, his gaze cold and distant, as though he held himself above the humanity of those who appeared before him. Harper's plea for clemency was straightforward. A minor offense, one that would have been overlooked for most, had brought him here, his past contributions ignored, his years of service discounted. The circumstances surrounding the incident were complicated. Harper had acted out of desperation, a moment of weakness driven by years of systemic failures that left many veterans struggling to survive. His attorney, a young and passionate public defender, had argued eloquently, painting a picture of a man who had given everything for his country, only to be abandoned by the very society he had defended. Judge Lowry listened with an expression that betrayed nothing. His thin-rimmed glasses perched on the edge of his nose, his eyes sharp as they scanned the documents before him. The silence in the room was oppressive, as though everyone were collectively holding their breath, waiting for his ruling. "Mr. Harper," Judge Lowry began, his voice carrying a tone of authority that seemed to fill every corner of the room. "While I acknowledge your service to this country, the facts of this case are clear. The law must be upheld, regardless of circumstance." Harper's jaw tightened, but he kept his gaze steady. He knew better than to expect sympathy from a man like Lowry, but he had hoped, at the very least, for understanding. Based on the evidence presented, Judge Lowry continued, his tone cold, almost robotic, "The petition for clemency is denied." A murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd, like a gust of wind rustling through autumn leaves. Harper's attorney lowered his head, a look of resignation on his face. He had tried his best, but in Judge Lowry's courtroom, mercy was a rare commodity, especially for someone like Harper, a man society had deemed expendable, despite his sacrifices. Harper didn't flinch. Years of discipline had taught him to hide his emotions, to maintain his composure even in the face of defeat. He met Lowry's gaze, his eyes steady, unblinking, as though he were daring the judge to see him, to truly see the man he was sentencing. But Lowry's expression remained impassive, untouched by the silent plea in Harper's eyes. With a slight nod, Harper stood, his back straight, his movements deliberate. He walked toward the exit, each step echoing in the quiet room, a man who carried his dignity like armor. His silence was not one of submission, but of quiet resilience, a resolve that had been honed through years of hardship. As he reached the doors, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder. Judge Lowry had already turned his attention to the next case, as though Harper were nothing more than a passing shadow, a figure to be dismissed. Harper's lips tightened, but he held his silence. Words would do nothing here. He had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the most powerful response. Outside the courthouse, the world was bright and indifferent. Harper squinted against the harsh sunlight, his hands clenched at his sides. He felt a swell of frustration, a bitter taste lingering on his tongue. This was supposed to be the land of the free, the home of the brave, but for him, it felt more like a prison, a place that had taken everything he had to give and then turned its back on him. As he walked away from the courthouse, the faces of people on the streets blurred past him. He was a stranger here, an invisible man among the bustling crowd. They didn't know his story, didn't care to know the battles he had fought and the scars he carried. To them, he was just another face, another life passing through the shadows. Yet even as anger simmered within him, Harper knew he couldn't let it consume him. He had seen what bitterness could do, how it could hollow a man from the inside, leaving nothing but resentment and regret. No, he would not let this defeat define him. He had faced down men with guns, with hatred in their eyes and death in their hands. He could face this, too. He walked to the local Veterans Center, a place that had become a refuge for him, and many others like him. Here, he was not judged by the color of his skin or by the mistakes of his past. Here, he was a man among men, bound by shared experiences, by the quiet understanding that only those who had served could fully comprehend. Inside, familiar faces greeted him with nods of respect, some reaching out to shake his hand, others simply offering a warm smile. He took his place among them, finding solace in their presence, a silent fellowship that needed no words. For now, this was enough. As he settled in, a young man approached, his expression tentative. "Mr. Harper," he said, his voice quiet, "I heard what happened in court today. It's not fair. You deserve better than this." Harper gave a small, wry smile, his eyes softening. "Life's not always fair, son," he replied, "but we keep going. That's all we can do." The young man nodded, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. Harper had become a mentor to many here, a source of strength and guidance. His words carried weight, resonating with those who struggled to find their footing in a world that often seemed intent on pushing them down. As the day wore on, Harper found himself reflecting on Judge Lurie's face, the cold, detached gaze that had dismissed him so easily. He wondered what it would take to break through that wall, to make a man like Lurie see the humanity in those he judged. But he knew better than to dwell on it. Life was too short to waste time on battles that couldn't be won. And yet fate had a way of twisting the paths of those it sought to test. Unbeknownst to both Harper and Lurie, their lives would soon become entangled in a way neither could have anticipated. In the heart of an unfolding crisis, when all seemed lost, the man who had been denied justice would find himself face to face with the one who had turned him away, and the question of mercy would take on a meaning far beyond the confines of any courtroom. The days of judgment and denial were over. What lay ahead was a trial of the heart, a test of courage and humanity that would reveal who they truly were, not as judge and defendant, but as men, bound together by fate in a world that often forgot the value of a second chance. The following morning, Lewis Harper rose with the dawn, a habit formed from years of military discipline. His small, tidy apartment was a far cry from the barracks and shared tents of his past, but it still bore the signs of a life structured around order and purpose. His neatly made bed, the sparse furniture, and the gleaming surfaces all reflected a life marked by simplicity and routine. He stood by the window, gazing out at the bustling city below. From up here, everything looked so peaceful, but he knew that each face in the crowd held its own story of struggle and survival. Harper's gaze drifted, his mind wandering back to memories that had never left him, memories that sometimes haunted his dreams. Years earlier, he had served in the Middle East. The missions had been grueling, the days long, and the nights even longer. He had seen things no man should see, friends lost, futures shattered, and the heavy weight of decisions that could never be undone. Harper had learned that war was more than battles. It was a test of endurance, a relentless march through fear, pain, and loss. Returning to civilian life had not been easy. He had been decorated and respected while in uniform. But when he came back, the world seemed different. The people he had protected looked at him as though he were a stranger. Finding a job had been nearly impossible, and the nightmares that followed him like shadows made even the simplest tasks feel insurmountable. Eventually, he found his way to the Veterans Center, where others like him gathered. each seeking solace in the understanding that only came from shared experiences. At the center, Harper had found a new purpose. He became a mentor, a guide for younger veterans who struggled to adapt. He organized support groups, offered advice, and provided a steadying presence for those who felt lost. His years in the military had taught him how to survive, but here he was learning how to heal. His service was not to his country anymore, but to his brothers and sisters in arms who, like him, bore invisible scars. That morning, Harper prepared for another day at the center. He took a last look at himself in the mirror, his reflection showing a man who had faced life's darkest moments and emerged resilient, though forever changed. His eyes, deep and weary, still held a flicker of hope, a hope he clung to even after the courtroom's cold dismissal. He adjusted his tie, brushed invisible dust off his blazer, and left his apartment, each step firm and determined. As he entered the center, he was greeted by a chorus of familiar voices. There was Daryl, a former Marine who had lost his leg to an IED. Jasmine, a young woman who had served as a medic and still struggled with the trauma of what she had witnessed. And Marcus, a once lively soldier who had become withdrawn since his return. They all looked up to Harper, not just as a mentor, but as a symbol of strength and resilience. "Morning, Mr. Harper," Jasmine called, a smile lighting up her face. Despite her own troubles, she always tried to maintain a cheerful demeanor, something Harper admired. "Good morning, Jasmine," he replied, his voice warm but steady. He placed a hand on her shoulder, giving a reassuring squeeze. "How are you holding up?" She shrugged, her smile faltering slightly. "Same as always, trying to keep the bad days at bay." Harper nodded knowingly. "One day at a time. You know where I am if you need to talk." He moved on, stopping to greet each person, offering words of encouragement or a listening ear. These moments gave him purpose, a reason to keep going, even on the days when he felt the weight of his own struggles pressing down on him. Midway through the day, he was approached by a young man named Chris, a newcomer to the center. Chris had just returned from his first deployment and was visibly shaken, haunted by memories that refused to let him go. "Mr. Harper," Chris began, his voice wavering. I don't know if I can do this. Everything feels different now. I don't feel like I belong here anymore." Harper motioned for him to sit down. "Tell me what's on your mind, Chris. Take your time." Chris took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly. "When I was over there, it felt like I had a purpose, like I knew who I was. But now, I feel lost. Everyone looks at me like I'm broken." Harper listened intently, his own heart aching with empathy. He remembered feeling the same way, the disorientation of returning to a world that hadn't changed, even though he had. "Chris," he said gently, "coming back is one of the hardest parts of serving. People who haven't been there don't understand what you've been through. But that doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you're carrying a weight that others can't see. And that's okay." Chris looked down, his expression conflicted. "How do you keep going? How do you deal with it?" Harper took a deep breath, his gaze steady and unwavering. "By remembering why I'm here. By finding a new mission. For me, that mission is helping people like you. And one day, you'll find yours. Until then, you just keep taking it one step at a time." Chris nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly, as though a small part of the burden had been lifted. Harper's words had resonated, providing a glimmer of hope in the darkness. That evening, as Harper left the center, he reflected on his own journey. The denial in court had stung, but he refused to let it define him. He had faced worse and come out the other side. No matter how many obstacles life threw at him, he would continue to push forward, not just for himself, but for the countless others who looked to him for strength. As he walked down the street, he passed by the courthouse. The building loomed over him, its cold, imposing structure a reminder of the world's harsh judgments. Harper paused, his gaze drifting to the windows on the upper floors where he imagined Judge Lowry was still working, likely handing down another ruling without a second thought to the lives he affected. He felt a flicker of anger, but quickly pushed it down. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, he reminded himself that justice was not something handed down by men in black robes. It was something he created in his own life, through his actions, his resilience, and his unwavering commitment to helping those in need. Little did Harper know that fate was about to intervene in a way that neither he nor Judge Lori could have anticipated. Their paths would cross again, not in the cold confines of a courtroom, but in a situation where lives hung in the balance, and Harper's true character would shine in a way that would challenge everything Judge Lori thought he knew about justice, mercy, and the power of redemption. As Harper walked away from the courthouse, his mind clear and his purpose firm, he had no inkling of the events that would soon unfold, events that would put everything he believed to the ultimate test. The courthouse echoed with the hurried footsteps of lawyers, clients, and security guards as Judge Thomas Lori wrapped up another day of hearings. It had been a long day, filled with cases that left him feeling weary and slightly irritable. As he glanced over the paperwork sprawled across his desk, he couldn't shake a strange feeling, a sense of something unsettled, hanging in the air like an unspoken warning. Lowry, however, was not a man to give in to feelings. He brushed it off, gathering his papers and preparing to leave. Just as he reached for his coat, the sound of raised voices drifted into his office, breaking the usual end-of-day quiet. Frowning, he opened his office door and looked down the hallway to see several security guards rushing toward the lobby, their expressions tense. "Judge Lori, stay in your office," a guard called out, his voice tinged with alarm. "We have an incident in the lobby." Lowry's heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" he demanded, his usual sternness breaking slightly. "Hostage situation," the guard replied before hurrying off, leaving Lowry standing in his office doorway, shocked and momentarily frozen. His mind raced, 1,000 thoughts colliding. This was the courthouse, his courthouse, a place where law and order reigned, not chaos and violence. He watched as people scrambled, ducking into offices or moving toward exits, trying to find safety. He knew he should stay in his office, but a compulsion drew him forward, his sense of responsibility pushing him to understand what was happening. He moved down the hall cautiously, his heart pounding as he approached the lobby. As he neared, the chaotic scene unfolded before him. 3 armed men had taken control of the main area, herding a dozen or so people into a corner with their weapons raised. The men were yelling, their voices rough and menacing, ordering everyone to stay silent and still. Among the hostages were courthouse staff, attorneys, and even a few civilians who had wandered in just moments before the incident. Lowry's eyes scanned the faces, his heart dropping as he recognized several of the hostages. His clerks, the young court reporter who had just started, a seasoned attorney he had known for years. Each one of them looked terrified, their eyes wide and pleading. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his own fear at bay. He wanted to do something, anything, to stop this madness, but he was unarmed and untrained for situations like these. His place was in a courtroom, not a crisis like this. One of the gunmen noticed Lowry watching from the hallway and pointed his weapon in his direction. "Hey, get over here," he barked, his voice harsh and filled with warning. Lowry hesitated for a split second before stepping forward, his face set in grim determination. He would face whatever awaited him, but he would do so with dignity. He walked toward the hostages, joining the frightened group as the gunman directed him with an impatient wave of his weapon. "Down on the floor, Judge," the man sneered, clearly recognizing him. There was a mocking edge in his voice, as though he took pleasure in seeing a figure of authority brought low. Lowry's jaw tightened, but he complied, lowering himself onto the cold, hard floor next to the other hostages. The fear he saw in their eyes mirrored his own, but he tried to keep his expression calm, hoping to convey a sense of control, however tenuous it might be. The gunmen conferred with each other in low voices, glancing occasionally at the hostages as they argued about their next move. Lowry's mind raced. trying to recall if there were any escape routes nearby, any means of alerting security outside the building. But every possibility seemed closed off, blocked by either the gunman or the unyielding walls of the courthouse. Suddenly, one of the gunmen, clearly the leader, approached the hostages, his gaze sharp and assessing. "All right," he said, his tone icy. "Here's what's going to happen. We need a bargaining chip, someone who'll get us what we want." His eyes scanned the group, lingering briefly on Lowry before moving to the younger hostages. Lowry felt a surge of protectiveness for them, and urged to shield them from whatever terror this man planned. But he was powerless, trapped in the same nightmare as the rest of them. As the leader continued his menacing assessment, there was a sudden commotion at the entrance of the courthouse. The doors swung open, and a figure entered, his steps calm and measured. The gunmen turned, their weapons raised, ready to confront this newcomer. Lowry's eyes widened in disbelief as he recognized the man who had just walked into the chaos, Lewis Harper. The veteran stood in the doorway, his posture steady and composed, his gaze unwavering. He took in the scene with a single sweep of his eyes, assessing the situation with a practiced calm that could only come from years of experience in high-stress environments. The gunmen seemed momentarily taken aback by Harper's calmness, their aggressive postures faltering as they registered the presence of this unexpected visitor. "Who the hell are you?" one of the gunmen demanded, his voice wavering slightly as he aimed his weapon at Harper. Harper held up his hands in a gesture of peace, his gaze fixed on the leader. "I'm just here to help," he said, his voice calm but firm. "No need for anyone to get hurt." The leader sneered, but Harper's composure seemed to unsettle him. "Help? You think you can just waltz in here and fix this?" Harper didn't flinch. "I've been in worse situations than this. Let's just talk. You don't want to hurt anyone here. I can see that." The leader scoffed, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Harper seized the moment, taking a step forward, his hand still raised. "Look around. These people, they're innocent. They don't deserve to be in the middle of this. Whatever you're here for, let's find a way to resolve it without bloodshed." Lowry watched in awe as Harper spoke, his words steady and reassuring. The veteran's calm presence seemed to cast a spell over the room, quieting the fear that had gripped the hostages and even softening the gunmen's hardened expressions. One of the younger gunmen, clearly more nervous than the others, lowered his weapon slightly, glancing uncertainly at his leader. "Maybe he's right, boss. Maybe we don't need to hurt anyone." The leader shot him a sharp look but didn't immediately dismiss the idea. Harper took another step forward, his tone gentle but persuasive. "Let's make a deal. Let these people go, and I'll stay here with you. You'll still have leverage, but no one has to get hurt. How does that sound?" The gunmen exchanged glances, visibly conflicted. Harper's calm demeanor, his willingness to put himself at risk for the sake of others, seemed to be shifting something within them, weakening their resolve. The leader's gaze flickered between Harper and the hostages, his mind clearly weighing the options. Finally, he nodded, albeit reluctantly. "Fine. You stay," they go. The hostages gasped, a mixture of relief and disbelief washing over them. Lowry felt a swell of admiration and gratitude toward Harper, the man he had dismissed so coldly in the courtroom not long ago. Here was a man who had every reason to turn his back on a system that had failed him, yet he was risking his life to protect those very people. The gunmen began ushering the hostages toward the exit, their weapons lowered slightly but still in hand. As Lowry stood to leave, he caught Harper's eye, a silent exchange passing between them, a mixture of respect, remorse, and gratitude that words could never convey. "Go on, Judge," Harper said quietly, his voice steady and reassuring. "They'll be fine." Lowry hesitated, torn between the urge to stay and the pressing need to ensure the safety of the others. In the end, he nodded, a silent promise lingering in his gaze. As he left the building with the other hostages, he looked back one last time, watching as Harper stood alone, facing down the men with the courage and resolve of a true hero. Outside, Laurie joined the crowd of relieved hostages, his mind racing with a mixture of emotions: admiration, guilt, and a newfound respect for the man he had once judged so harshly. For the first time, he saw Lewis Harper not as a case number or a name on a piece of paper, but as a man of profound strength and integrity, someone who embodied the very principles of justice and courage he had spent his career upholding. As the emergency responders began to arrive, Laurie knew that this moment would stay with him forever, a reminder of the true meaning of justice and the power of second chances. He only hoped that he would get the chance to repay the man who had saved his life, in more ways than one. As the hostages emerged from the courthouse, paramedics and police officers surged forward to tend to them, wrapping blankets around their shoulders and checking for injuries. The bright flashing lights of police cars reflected off the courthouse walls, painting the scene in an ominous red and blue glow. But amidst the controlled chaos, Judge Thomas Laurie found himself rooted to the spot, his gaze fixed on the courthouse doors. He couldn't shake the image of Lewis Harper standing alone, facing down the armed men with nothing but his calm resolve. The man who had just risked his life to protect others was the same man Laurie had coldly dismissed in court, denying him justice and clemency only days before. The irony was sharp, piercing through Laurie's sense of self-righteousness and leaving him feeling stripped bare. "Judge Laurie," a voice called, jolting him from his thoughts. Detective Amelia Grant approached, her expression a mix of respect and concern. "Are you all right, sir? You should probably get checked out by the paramedics." Laurie nodded absently, his thoughts still on Harper. "Detective," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "what's happening inside? Is Mr. Harper still in there?" Detective Grant gave him a long look, as though she sensed the turmoil in his eyes. "Yes, Judge. Harper convinced the gunman to release the hostages in exchange for him staying behind. He's negotiating with them, trying to keep things calm until our tactical team can get into position." Laurie swallowed hard, the weight of guilt settling heavily on his shoulders. "Isn't there something we can do? He shouldn't have to be in there alone." Grant's gaze softened. "He's a trained soldier, Judge. He knows what he's doing. Honestly, he may have just saved all of our lives tonight." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You know him personally, don't you?" Laurie shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to answer. In truth, he had known Harper only as a case file, another number in the endless stream of people who came through his courtroom. But now he felt a strange connection to the man. A connection born not just from shared danger, but from an unspoken understanding of sacrifice and resilience. "I'd recently had a case involving him," Laurie replied, his voice subdued. He knew he couldn't bring himself to admit the full truth, that he had denied Harper the justice he deserved, only to now witness the depth of his integrity firsthand. Detective Grant nodded, sensing there was more to the story, but choosing not to press. "Well, let's hope this ends peacefully. Harper has already done more than anyone could ask." Laurie could only nod, watching as officers moved into strategic positions around the courthouse. His heart pounded with anxiety, the helplessness gnawing at him. For the first time in his career, he found himself on the other side of justice, not as the arbiter of someone else's fate, but as a powerless bystander, dependent on the courage and compassion of a man he had wronged. Inside the courthouse, Harper remained calm, his focus unwavering despite the tense situation. The gunmen were agitated, their eyes darting between each other and the doors as if expecting the police to storm in at any moment. Harper knew he had to keep them grounded, prevent them from spiraling into panic that could turn deadly. "Listen," Harper spoke evenly, addressing the leader directly. "This doesn't have to end badly. You made your point. You have everyone's attention. Now, let's make sure no one gets hurt." The leader sneered, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You think you know us, old man. You don't know anything about what we've been through. We're just invisible, and today, we're making sure the world sees us." Harper nodded, understanding more than the leader realized. "I do know," he replied, his tone soft but firm. "I know what it's like to be overlooked, judged before you're even given a chance. But this isn't the way to change that." The younger gunman, the one who had shown hesitation earlier, shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the leader as if questioning their decision. Harper noticed, seizing the opportunity to reach out. "Think about the people out there, the families of everyone here," Harper continued, his gaze steady. "This decision will affect all of their lives, not just yours. Do you really want to carry that weight? I've been there, and trust me, it's not something you want to live with." The leader's face hardened, but Harper could see the internal struggle, the conflicting emotions flickering across his features. It was a battle between pride, fear, and the desire to be seen, acknowledged for once, even if it meant taking desperate measures. Outside, Laurie paced, his normally composed demeanor unraveling with every passing minute. His mind raced through all the times he had dismissed pleas for leniency or clemency without a second thought, viewing them as inconveniences to his rigid sense of justice. He had always believed that upholding the law required detachment, an unyielding adherence to rules without letting emotions cloud his judgment. But now, watching Harper risk his life for strangers, including him, Laurie couldn't ignore the gnawing realization that he had been wrong. Justice, he now understood, was not only about punishment, it was also about compassion, mercy, and seeing the humanity in those who stood before him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the courthouse doors opened, and the gunmen emerged, hands raised in surrender. Harper walked behind them, his expression calm and composed, though Laurie could see the exhaustion etched into his features. The police quickly moved in, arresting the gunmen and escorting them to waiting patrol cars. Harper watched them go, a faint hint of sadness in his eyes, as though he understood the hopelessness that had driven them to such desperate actions. Laurie stepped forward, approaching Harper with a mixture of gratitude and remorse. The words he wanted to say felt tangled in his throat, held back by years of pride and rigid self-control. "Mr. Harper," Laurie began, his voice wavering slightly, I don't know how to thank you. You saved us all." Harper nodded, his expression unreadable. "Just doing what I could, Judge. Sometimes you have to step up, even when the odds are against you." Laurie took a deep breath, forcing himself to confront the truth he had been avoiding. "I owe you more than just thanks. I owe you an apology." He paused, the weight of his words pressing down on him. "I denied your petition without giving it the consideration it deserved. I failed to see who you really are, what you've been through, and what you're capable of." Harper regarded him for a moment, his gaze steady and piercing. "We all make mistakes, Judge. The important thing is what we learn from them." Laurie's heart ached with the realization of how deeply he had misjudged Harper, but there was also a sense of hope, a chance to change, to make amends. He extended his hand, a gesture of respect and reconciliation. "Thank you, Mr. Harper," he said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "For everything." Harper looked at the offered hand, hesitating for a brief moment before reaching out to shake it. His grip was firm, his gaze unflinching. In that handshake, Laurie felt the weight of Harper's strength and resilience, a reminder of the humanity he had overlooked in his pursuit of rigid justice. As the police and paramedics continued their work, Laurie stood beside Harper, feeling the first stirrings of a transformation within himself. He knew that this experience had changed him irrevocably, forcing him to confront the flaws in his approach to justice and compassion, and he vowed, in that moment, to be a different judge, a better man, because of the courage and integrity he had witnessed in Lewis Harper. The night air was cool, filling Laurie's lungs as he watched Harper walk away, his figure fading into the crowd. But even as Harper disappeared from sight, Laurie knew that his presence would remain with him, guiding him toward a deeper understanding of justice and mercy. For the first time in his career, Thomas Laurie felt that he was truly beginning to understand what it meant to uphold the law, not as an enforcer, but as a protector of humanity and dignity. And it was all thanks to a man he had once dismissed, a man who, in his quiet courage, had taught him the true meaning of justice. The courthouse ordeal might have ended, but Judge Thomas Lowry's world had been irrevocably changed. Each day, as he walked the familiar corridors of his office, he felt an unusual weight pressing on him. The memory of Lewis Harper, standing steadfast against danger for people who had largely dismissed him, gnawed at Lowry's conscience. He realized he had not just witnessed an act of courage that night. He had been offered a rare glimpse into his own shortcomings, a judge who prided himself on fairness, but had been blind to the deeper meaning of justice. In the days that followed, Lowry found himself revisiting Harper's case. He pored over the notes and documents with a new perspective, a lingering shame coloring his every action. Each line of Harper's file, the years he had served, the commendations he'd earned, the struggles he'd faced upon returning home, felt like accusations against Lowry's own judgment. Harper's petition for clemency, which Lowry had once dismissed as another statistic, now seemed to pulse with the very human story he had ignored. Lowry sat alone in his chambers, the muted light casting long shadows across the papers sprawled on his desk. He took a deep breath, trying to make sense of the conflicting emotions churning within him. For the first time in his life, he felt as if the foundation of his beliefs had cracked, exposing flaws he hadn't known existed. He had always told himself that his role as a judge was to uphold the law with an impartial hand. But now, he questioned what impartiality really meant. Did it mean ignoring the hardships people had faced, the sacrifices they had made? Did it mean looking past the fact that justice wasn't simply a rigid application of rules, but a nuanced balance of fairness, empathy, and understanding? As these thoughts lingered, Lowry knew he had to make amends, not just to Harper, but to himself, to the profession he had sworn to honor. He knew he couldn't rewrite the past, but he could, perhaps, shape the future in a way that honored the lessons Harper had unknowingly taught him. Determined, Lowry reached for the phone and dialed the number of his clerk. "I need a meeting arranged with Mr. Lewis Harper," he said, his voice steady but infused with purpose. "Make it happen as soon as possible." Lewis Harper was surprised when he received the call from Judge Lowry's office. He had expected that after the hostage crisis, his connection to the judge would fade into the background of his life, a strange twist in an otherwise hard-fought existence. But Lowry's invitation was polite and persistent, and after some thought, Harper agreed to meet. The following morning, he walked into Judge Lowry's chambers with his usual quiet dignity, his posture straight, his gaze calm. The events of that night were still fresh in his mind, but he felt no animosity. He had acted because he believed it was the right thing to do, not because he expected gratitude or recognition. But the judge's request for a meeting had piqued his curiosity, and he was willing to hear him out. Lowry stood as Harper entered, extending his hand in a gesture of respect. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Harper," he said, his tone warm but laced with an undercurrent of humility. He gestured for Harper to sit across from him, the formality of the courtroom absent in the small, comfortable office setting. Harper took a seat, watching Lowry with an expression of quiet patience, waiting for him to speak. Lowry hesitated, searching for the right words, feeling the weight of the unspoken apology he owed. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Harper," Lowry finally said, his voice soft. "I owe you more than that, actually. I owe you respect, understanding, and recognition for the sacrifices you've made." Harper's expression softened slightly, but he remained silent, allowing Lowry the space to continue. "When I denied your petition, I did so without truly seeing you," Lowry admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "I told myself that I was being fair, impartial. But in reality, I was overlooking the complexities of your life, the struggles you've endured since your service. I failed to see the humanity behind the paperwork." He looked down, his fingers tracing the edges of the folder on his desk. "That was a failure on my part, and it's something I intend to correct." Harper met Lowry's gaze, his own eyes reflecting a mix of compassion and understanding. "Judge, we all make choices. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. What matters is that we learn from them." Lowry nodded, his respect for Harper deepening. "Thank you," he replied quietly. "Your words mean more than you know." They sat in silence for a moment, each man lost in his own thoughts, connected by an unspoken bond of respect and forgiveness. Lowry took a deep breath, his next words carrying the weight of his determination. "I want to revisit your case, Mr. Harper," he said firmly. "I can't change what happened in the past, but I believe there is a way forward, a way to rectify the injustice you faced. I want to work with you, to find a way to help you move forward with your life." Harper's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his face. He had expected many things from this meeting, but a genuine offer of assistance from the judge was not one of them. "Judge Lowry," he said carefully, "I appreciate your words, and I appreciate your offer. But I didn't come here looking for favors or special treatment. I've made peace with my past, and I know that life doesn't always give us second chances." Lowry leaned forward, his gaze intense. "But you've earned a second chance, Mr. Harper. You've earned it through your service, through your sacrifice, and through the courage you showed the other night. You've shown me that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about redemption, about recognizing the humanity in each of us." Harper looked at Lowry for a long moment, weighing his words. Finally, he nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "All right, Judge," he replied. "If you're willing to help, I'm willing to try." They discussed Harper's case at length, going over the options available, exploring ways to bring his story to light in a way that might lead to a fresh hearing. As they talked, Lowry felt a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to a version of justice that extended beyond the black and white confines of the law. But it wasn't just Harper's case that drove him now. It was a broader commitment to changing his approach as a judge. He knew he couldn't undo years of rigid rulings, but he could reshape the legacy he left behind. He could be the kind of judge who listened, who sought to understand, who valued the lives and experiences of those who came before him. The meeting ended with a handshake, a gesture that carried more meaning than any words could convey. As Harper left Lowry's office, he felt a strange sense of hope, a belief that perhaps, just perhaps, his journey toward justice wasn't over. That night, Judge Lowry sat alone in his office, reflecting on the choices that had brought him to this moment. He thought of the countless cases he had presided over, the lives he had impacted with a signature, a ruling, a few spoken words. He realized that his role was not just to enforce the law, but to understand the people the law affected, to see the individuals behind the names on the docket. Harper's case had shown him the limits of his old ways, the flaws in his unyielding approach, and as he sat in the quiet of his office, he made a silent vow to carry the lessons he had learned forward. He would be a judge who valued humanity, who sought not just to punish but to heal, to offer a path toward redemption for those who had earned it. The road ahead would be challenging, and he knew he would face opposition from colleagues and critics alike. But he was ready to face it, armed with a newfound understanding of what justice truly meant. As he prepared to leave, Lowry glanced at the folder on his desk, the folder containing Lewis Harper's case. He placed his hand on it, a silent promise to see this journey through, to fight for the justice that Harper deserved. With renewed purpose, he turned off the light and stepped into the night, the memory of Harper's courage guiding him toward a better, more compassionate path. The months following that fateful meeting between Judge Thomas Lowry and Lewis Harper unfolded like the final chapters of a novel, a tale of justice, redemption, and the unyielding power of humanity. As Lowry delved deeper into Harper's case, his commitment to righting past wrongs became a beacon of change within the legal community, a ripple that spread across the courthouse, affecting everyone who had ever thought justice was merely about rules and punishment. Judge Lowry, now invigorated with a renewed sense of purpose, revisited every document, every testimony related to Harper's case, scrutinizing them with a compassion and depth that was entirely new to him. It wasn't easy. Harper's case was complicated, tangled in layers of legal red tape and procedural formalities that had been conveniently weaponized against him. But Lowry was relentless. He reached out to legal experts, social justice advocates, and veteran support organizations, gathering insights that helped him build a robust petition for a retrial. For Lori, this was more than just a case. It was a testament to his evolution, a chance to rewrite the story that had once been marred by his own lack of understanding. Meanwhile, Lewis Harper found himself grappling with emotions he hadn't expected. He had long accepted that the justice system was flawed, that people like him often fell through the cracks. But now, for the first time, he felt something resembling hope. Every time he spoke to Lori, every time he saw the judge's sincere efforts to champion his cause, he was reminded of the power of perseverance, of refusing to be defined by society's expectations. He had spent years advocating for veterans like himself, but it was only now that he felt someone was advocating for him. The day of the hearing finally arrived. The courtroom was packed, buzzing with tension and anticipation. This wasn't just any trial. It had become a symbol of reform, a high-stakes drama where people from all walks of life had gathered to witness the possibility of redemption for a man who had been denied justice. News of the case had spread, attracting journalists, activists, and curious onlookers who wanted to see if the system could indeed acknowledge its flaws and correct them. As Harper sat beside his attorney, he couldn't help but feel the weight of all the eyes on him. He glanced over at Judge Lori, who was seated at the front of the room, his expression calm but resolute. There was a newfound respect between the two men, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had undertaken together. They had gone from adversaries to allies, bound by a shared commitment to justice that transcended the roles they played in society. The defense attorney made a compelling case, presenting new evidence and character witnesses who spoke of Harper's dedication, integrity, and the sacrifices he had made for his country. Veterans who had served with Harper took the stand, recounting stories of his bravery, his selflessness, and the way he had always put others before himself. As each person spoke, the courtroom fell silent, hanging on every word, every testimony that painted a picture of a man who was far from the criminal he had been labeled as. Then it was Judge Lori's turn to speak. Rising from his seat, he faced the room with a gravitas that silenced even the quiet whispers in the back. He began not with an apology, but with a story, his own journey of understanding, the events that had led him to this moment. He spoke of the hostage crisis, the courage Harper had displayed, and how that single act of bravery had opened his eyes to the humanity he had overlooked in his courtroom for so many years. "I was wrong," Lori admitted, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "I was wrong to let prejudice and protocol cloud my judgment, to see only what was on paper and not the person behind it. Lewis Harper showed me what justice truly means, and it's my duty to ensure that the system does not fail him again." There was a murmur of astonishment in the courtroom. It was unheard of, a judge openly admitting his mistakes, acknowledging his own biases. The admission was raw, powerful, and it rippled through the room, breaking down barriers that had long stood between the judiciary and the people it served. Harper watched in awe, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and disbelief. For a man who had once believed that his fate was sealed, that no one would ever see him beyond his case number, this moment felt like a miracle. The retrial continued, with arguments presented from both sides. But it was clear that Lori's words had left an indelible mark on everyone present. By the end of the hearing, the judge overseeing the retrial ruled in Harper's favor, granting him clemency and the chance to rebuild his life without the burden of an unjust conviction. A wave of applause erupted in the courtroom as the verdict was announced. Harper's attorney clasped his hand, a broad smile on his face, while veterans in the audience cheered, clapping and exchanging words of gratitude and admiration. Harper himself was overwhelmed, his eyes glistening with tears he had long held back. For so long, he had carried the weight of injustice on his shoulders. But now he felt something he hadn't in years: freedom. Judge Lori approached him afterward, extending his hand. Harper took it, gripping it firmly, the two men sharing a moment that needed no words. They had both fought for this outcome, each in their own way, and the mutual respect they felt was undeniable. "I don't know how to thank you, Judge," Harper said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't need to thank me, Lewis," Laurie replied, using Harper's first name for the first time. "I should be thanking you for showing me what it truly means to serve justice." The aftermath of the case brought significant changes. Judge Laurie became an advocate for judicial reform, using his platform to push for policies that emphasized empathy, rehabilitation, and a deeper understanding of each defendant's background. His transformation inspired colleagues and the legal community alike, sparking conversations about the importance of seeing justice as a tool for healing, not just punishment. As for Harper, he found himself in a new chapter of his life. His story had resonated with people far beyond the courtroom, and he was offered a position with a nonprofit organization that provided legal support and resources for veterans struggling with the justice system. Harper accepted the role with gratitude, determined to help others navigate the same challenges he had faced. His journey had come full circle, and now he was in a position to make a lasting impact. The bond between Harper and Laurie endured, their unlikely friendship becoming a testament to the power of change and the resilience of the human spirit. They would meet occasionally, exchanging stories of their work, supporting each other's efforts to bring justice to those who needed it most. Together, they became symbols of hope and redemption, proof that even the deepest divides could be bridged by understanding and compassion. In the end, Lewis Harper's story wasn't just about one man's fight for justice. It was about the ways in which our lives are intertwined, about the unexpected connections that can transform us. It was about the belief that everyone deserves a second chance, not just in the eyes of the law, but in the hearts of those around them. And as Harper walked away from the courthouse for the last time, free at last, he knew that he had not only regained his dignity, but had paved the way for others to do the same. In that moment, he was more than a veteran, more than a man who had faced injustice. He was a beacon of resilience, a reminder that courage and integrity can change even the most rigid hearts.